Hey everybody, Coach here. Hey, glad you took a few minutes to join me here this week. I hope you had a very enjoyable, safe and sane holiday weekend. If you are in the United States, we celebrated our 4th of July. And if not, I hope you had a good weekend and a good work week. Hey, this week we're talking about a sensitive subject, one that I know I'm going to have to kind of tippy-toe through so that I don't step on any toes, offend anybody, and certainly that is not the case of what I intend to do. This week we are talking about landscaping for the physically challenged individual or individuals. It is something that I've had to do a handful of times, which I'll discuss, and maybe you're having to face something like that. So I'm glad you're here. Let's get this show underway, huh? Again, thank you for joining me. Hey, I'm Matt. You can call me Coach. Every week, every Friday, I bring with you landscape design concepts, DIY education, so that you guys can tackle landscape projects yourself, get the results that you want, save a boatload of money in the process, and more importantly, be a lot more self-reliant in this day and age. Man, you know, after hitting it hard for 20 plus years in the green industry, both as a self-employed landscape designer and contractor, retail nursery manager and educator, I think I really bring a lot of knowledge and education that I want to share with you guys, the new, modern, educated, self-reliant homeowner of today. Okay, let's get started. One of the very first things, and I'm serious about this, the very first thing I'm going to share with you is a disclaimer. I am not going to stand in front of you, and I am not going to tout being the be-all, know-all expert of landscaping for the physically challenged. I'm sure there are thousands of people that know more about it than me, but they're not on this platform, and they don't have the guts to come out and share it with you. So that's what I'm doing. I don't plan on stubbing my toe, and I don't plan on doing anything that's going to offend anybody, okay? So let's move forward with that out of the way. For my second order of business, I'd like to thank Meg B. Meg B was a viewer on the channel not too long ago, and she shared a little comment to me and sparked my interest in talking about this subject this week. So Meg B, she brought this question or statement to the channel. So Meg B, after you gave us this response, I'd like to share this with you. Number one, thanks for your interest in the channel. I appreciate you watching, and I loved your comment. And if you are ever on the go, check out the podcast as well. So Meg B shared this with us. And when you come to a, shall we say, a fork in the road, when it is obvious that you're going to have to change some things, either for yourself, for a family member, or maybe you're a contractor doing work for somebody, everything that surrounds the physically challenged and the modifications that you have to do comes down to one major thing: planning. Planning and due diligence. If you apply yourself and give yourself some thought, not just willy-nilly it on a Saturday morning, you will have such a more long-term project success than if you just go out there, slam some 2x4s together, build yourself a ramp, and move on. That's not the way we do things here on this channel. Due diligence is key, planning is key, and methodical step-by-step execution is key here on the channel, and it does not vary with this particular topic. I will also say that the handful of clients that I've had over the years, what I learned in the short exposures to this from a landscape perspective is that you use the individual who suffers from the challenge to begin with. Use them in the respect of how do they get around, what is their challenge, what is their height, what is their reach, how much disability do they have now versus 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years down the road. Because from a professional perspective, I want to plan a minimum of the 5-year mark, if not the 10-year mark. And we also want to do it so that should you ever sell the property, the landscape can be retrofitted back to something that'll appeal to the masses. maybe with some simple disassembly, maybe with some modification, maybe greenscape modification, additions or subtractions. But most of the time, I always designed around safety of navigation, and that's really what we're going to cover here today. So using kind of a broad brush approach to this, let's go over some of the categories that are very, very sensitive when it comes to the type of challenged person we're discussing. I want to talk about the visually impaired first. If you have had to broach this subject and had to tackle a project or had a project tackled and you paid for it, what did you learn and what were the key takeaways from doing these projects based on whatever person you were landscaping and modifying your property was all about? Drop me in a comment below and let me know, or email me so I can share it, always on the QT. Thank you. So doing some research in the past, it really hasn't changed a whole lot, even when I started to research it for this particular episode. When you have someone who's visually impaired, you are going to landscape and design in accordance to the other senses that they still have. There are other faculties that are still up and running really well. So we could do things like appeal to hearing, sound, smell, etc. And when you have someone who's visually impaired, they can key in on these kinds of things. So what do you mean, Coach? What are you talking about? Well, think about it. If you have something that has smell, perhaps you have a jasmine wall, perhaps you have a gardenia wall, something along those lines. It's in the backyard where they're going to be navigating. If it's that time of year, they can clue into that and orient themselves as far as where they're at in the yard. Sound, water features is a very key way for someone to hone in on where they're at and where they need to turn. So the other senses really come into play very, very heavily, and that's what I used on a couple of designs that I remember. Now, when you're talking about someone who is 100% blind, who either A, needs assistance getting around, or get around on their own with the aid of a cane or a seeing eye dog or whatever, I always design things where the pathways came into play. They came into play in a wider way with various different textures of finish on concrete patios, tile patios, breaks in the concrete as far as cold joints and stuff so they could actually measure the distance of their walking. Came in very, very key. So instead of having a simple broom finish everywhere, I might have a rough broom finish on the patio part, and then a smoother broom finish when it came to the walkways that went around and out to the front. Perhaps you have some type of striation that is put, or a cut joints right before you get to the back slider or the French doors or whatever you have, or the front door. So as they are navigating, they can sense these things and know where they are at. Now, if you're a commercial business owner and you've just taken over a new building, make sure, and I say this from experience, make sure that your building comes into ADA compliance. Make sure that you have accessibility there. If you are inviting the general public into your building to do business, make sure that there are proper doors that are easily accessible, that the ramps and stuff are within ADA compliance, that you have all the little nubby platforms there that they have outside the stores and stuff, so that the visually impaired can deal with that kind of stuff. Very, very important. I worked in a city in Northern California, and there was a particular gentleman there that always went around town in his little ADA van, and all he did was look for ADA violations. And he was a mobility challenged person. He was wheelchair bound. And he must have sued various businesses around the town that I lived in no less than 10 times and never lost. Always won a settlement. So make sure, if you're a commercial business owner, make sure that you're within that ADA compliance. Look it up, because it may change. I know that ADA is a national type, but if you're in a different country or you have special circumstances within the town or the city that you're in, make sure you know it before you get underway. The last thing a new business owner wants is to have that type of a controversy come into play when you're just starting to open the doors, am I right? Now, the other thing about visually challenged is not every one of them, if you take the disease like macular degeneration, a gradual descending loss of vision, you know, not always are they 100% blind, and they can still navigate around fairly well in the beginnings. It's only in the advanced stages that they really start to lose vision totally, or to the point where they need assistance. So in that case, again, pathways are wide, plan for the future down the road, and allow for the introduction of lighting for early evening and evening navigation. In these particular cases, the old 3-foot walkways, those are out. You're going to have to put in something as a minimum 4.5 feet. I would strongly suggest, if you have the room, 5 to 6 foot wide. And why do I say that? Because eventually that person may need assistance getting around, whether they're having to hold on to a service animal to help them navigate, or they have somebody, you know, who has their arm and navigate. Now you've got someone who's disabled and is having to walk around their yard or out to their driveway or whatever with maybe another person or an animal. This calls for extra width. 3 foot is out, 4 foot is out. Consider 5 to 6 feet wide walkways at a minimum. Very, very, very important. Now when it comes to the lighting, heck, I'm getting old, and I know Maestro, when she's out at dusk, sometimes she has trouble discerning when the light starts to get low. You know, so do I. So I would like to say that landscape lighting installed in maybe just a little, not an extreme, we don't want to make it look like the Vegas Strip. We just want it to be illuminated and there's no dark spots anywhere. So coming into play with things like that, down lighting, hanging from tree canopy if you have it, path lighting, probably every 8 feet instead of every 12 to 15 feet, which sometimes they are, and really light it up. Make sure that it is comfortable for someone who has low light tolerances, that they can walk around safely and feel very secure. Not only that, but it really increases the security of your property as well. When installing something like that, you can always do the motion activated high voltage floodlight type of stuff, but it all depends on everyone's circumstances. We're speaking strictly of a low voltage landscape lighting situation right now, and you could probably look into automation for sure. Your transformer timers, probably a photocell type of timer, so it comes on right when it needs to come on, and then it goes off a few hours later, whatever you decide. Okay, let's change horses here for just a second. Let's talk about the mobility challenge type of person. Someone who is either needs assistance by another person. Maybe they use a cane, maybe they use a walker, maybe they're all the way into a wheelchair and will never expect to come back out of that wheelchair as far as moving around any longer. We talk about durable surfaces again. Durable surfaces can come in a couple of forms with a mobility challenged person. It can be decking, like raised decking. It can be cement walkways. It can be asphalt driveways. But width plays a big role in that. Especially call your attention to driveways. Driveways of a low angle nature make a lot of sense when you have someone who's mobility challenged. You don't want to have a driveway that has a 10 to 15 degree angle and you're having to navigate someone out there and then get them up in a vehicle. Probably time to find a different way of getting those people around. And if you do have a nice flat driveway, then width is important. Wheelchairs do take up a lot of room. So when doors start opening or sliding open, you want enough room where that person can come in and maybe a lift is going to bring them up into their vehicle. If you have the standard 20-foot driveway, like a lot of residential yards do, then that's going to be tight. If you have one parked vehicle and then the vehicle that's going to be used, it will be tight. So maybe make another 4 foot on one side and 6 foot on the other if you can. Widen it out another 10 feet. That's just my suggestion. Many people who deal with physically challenged and mobility challenged, we all know about the ramps. When it comes to ramping for people to get from point A up to a portal of some kind, a doorway, slider, whatever you want to call it. Less than 5 degrees is kind of important, especially if you have a ways to go. Now, there are many physically challenged people that still live in homes that they may have been there for 40 plus years. And now, because of their age, they're very mobility challenged. And now they're having to navigate a set of stairs or steps. It starts to become an increasing hazard. Look into things like this. I found this online. You know, stair lifts aren't for just indoors. They have wonderful stair lifts for outdoors as well. And you can walk her up to it, get in that seat, and then you can ramp your way all the way to the front door if your door is still elevated way up above your driveway or wherever you park your vehicle. Another thing about pathways and walkways is edgings. Edgings that tend to deter the ability to go off the edge of durable surfaces. These can be actual raised curbings that are part of the walkway itself. They can be decorative and treated and stained wood that are actually drilled into the concrete and fill in that way so that you cannot take a wheelchair or a walker and go past those. So you keep the person centered on the walkway and safe. When we talked about lighting before, I forgot to mention LED strip lighting. You can literally make walkways and stuff into lighted pathways so that they can see very well. Also for the visually impaired. Duh, coach, you should have said it earlier, but I forgot. Okay, when we're talking about bed design, I want to focus in on someone who is wheelchair bound, and I want to talk about the ability for reach. Just because we lose the ability to get around on our own 2 feet, under our own steam except with our arms, it's very important that reach comes into play as far as designing of planting beds, etc. The person needs to literally be measured when they're seated in the chair. Where can they comfortably reach from the center of their seated chair without having to try, if they have the capability of having to reach way over. Okay, so when designing that kind of thing, I always found that beds, anything wider than 2 feet and elevated, a raised bed, or even a raised table type of landscape where they can literally roll themselves under and then have the ability to reach over and garden or landscape in a tray type table situation that's probably 18 inches, maybe 12 inches. The other thing is for a challenged person out in their backyard or their front yard, you should have multiple secondary pathways, and they should be able to navigate around, not just in one L. They should be able to go around the entire property if they can on a safe, durable surface. One of the things that comes across is endurance. How long can someone go out and wheel themselves or walker themselves around? And what I found really useful is rest stops. Little pit stops out in the yard where they can sit down and relax, preferably in a shady situation, even if it's a man-made shade like an umbrella or whatever, and then consider something of interest, a focal point, if you will. When they're at that rest stop, they have something they can focus on, recover from their toils at the moment, and then they can get up when rested and move on to their next task or back inside. But don't give the situation where they're out in the back 40, so to speak, and all of a sudden you have a semi-emergent problem and they're gonna go down. They need frequent stops in certain circumstances, especially in the warm weather, like right now, 90 degrees in the mountains of New York, 90 freaking degrees in the shade. Let's talk about maintenance. Maintenance comes from a thorough plan and execution of the installation of the landscape itself. Strongly encourage you to be hardscape dominant. Your greenscape is going to be accents in this case, and your hardscape, your lighting, your pathways, your patios, ramps, etc., those are going to be your dominant features for ease of navigation. And then you have parts of greenscape, container plants, whatever you decide on, those will be your greenscape. And consider it in a way that it can be changed back, like I spoke about earlier. Now, if you make raised beds and stuff out of concrete and that kind of stuff, that's totally on you. And you might appeal to buyers if it's a low maintenance type of thing and you have big wide walkways. Maybe they have a family member that's moving in with them. Just consider it. You know, you never know who your buyer is going to be. When you're doing your beds, always consider a raised bed situation. It's so much easier when you're seated in something like a wheelchair that you're not having to do this and you're not having to try and do this and reaching down. So everything should be right at hip level. So that's where you want to make your raised beds at from a seated position. That's why it's really important to measure the person's height when they're seated. That way they can enjoy getting out still, and it's not a hassle because you did the due diligence necessary to make it comfortable for them. Certainly, if this person is under your care, it'll still be a little easier for them, but let's say they're not quite to the need of assisted living just yet. So always consider automation of everything. We talked about the automation of lighting, also automation of irrigation if it's called for. If you have raised beds and those beds are dependent on, yeah, you do get some rain, but most of the time raised beds will always require supplemental water. So consider a drip irrigation system. And make sure it's on a timer, and that timer is easily accessible to that person who's going to be living there. If you have lawn situations still, which I might have you reconsider if you have a person that's challenged, the weekly maintenance that goes into that should probably be considering outsourcing. Outsource it to a professional service if that person can't do it anymore, or you don't have the mileage to get to them every week. The outsourcing with just the right company on board will really make life a lot easier. If you have a very small lawn situation, one that is certainly under 500 square feet, then you could also consider some of the automated robot lawnmowers that are out there. The Roombas for your lawn. Those are pretty expensive, but hey, they will do it, and they can be put out to automatically mow your lawn. Something to consider. The other thing is you might want to consider if there's a condominium, townhome type of situation with a patio out there, you might want to consider some vertical gardening for someone who has a hard time moving around. Vertical gardening really opens up the floor of that patio area and allows growth upwards and into their eye space coming from containers or coming from raised beds. You can use trellises and pyramidal obelisks and everything. You can do viners and twiners and tomatoes, and they can tie them on there. Makes things a lot easier too. So consider vertical gardening. When it comes to water gardening is always a luxury. But for someone who really loves the sound of water and visually impaired who could hone in on where the water sound is coming from, always consider a raised platform type of water feature. Standalone, basin installed on some type of a pedestal, and then the raised feature up at eye level. That way they can reach the basin, they can fill the basin if necessary, and they can care for it. Automation is key here too. Make sure that they have an auto dosing system so algae and that kind of stuff doesn't get on a runaway freight train with them. And they can also autofill it too. That comes in the construction part. You can always run like a little 1/4 inch autofill toilet ball valve type of apparatus on those basins. And that way when it drops below a certain level, it'll automatically fill. That way the person doesn't have to be dragging a hose over there or leaving a hose out across the yard so they could easily fill it. Another trip hazard, am I right? This is for you, Meg B. When you're talking about plants, consider small. Everything goes small. You may have a yard where you can accommodate one nice shade tree, and that should be it. Something that is easy to maintain. All plants you should consider being perennials of a smaller nature, shrubs of a dwarf nature, fruit trees and citrus of a ultra dwarf and true dwarf nature. That way, when they're planted either in containers or raised beds, they're always going to be within reach or at least telescopic reach for harvest or for raking or for weeding, whatever it might be. Everything is small. lowered, and within reach. I like to think of things like true dwarf citrus, dwarf blueberry, ultra dwarf fruit trees. God, I had some great ultra dwarf fruit trees at Weed Patch Ranch. They only got to 6 feet tall, but I did have to prune them up in July a little bit and thin them out. But if someone was in a wheelchair and they had a telescopic little pruner that they could use, could have easily done it without any problem. And the surface that I had out there was solid enough that someone could roll or they could use their walker to get out there. So it was kind of cool. Ultra dwarf fruit trees or genetic dwarf. Lastly, tools. Tools are lightweight, ergonomically sound, generally supported at the wrist where you slip it over and it's wrist supported, and it can have a little bit of a length, so extends the reach of that person. It is telescopic, where they can tighten it down and be able to harvest, be able to rake, be able to weed if they have to. Everything is good quality and lightweight. Don't get crap. Don't find stuff on sale at the grocery store. You're probably going to have to order some online through specialty stores. That's really important. We talked about the stair lifts. For someone who is on a very steep, almost cliffside home or property, you have a third story decking, a second story decking, a ground floor decking, and maybe even something down below that cantilevers over this beautiful canyon or wherever you happen to be living. Consider the investment of an elevator. I'm serious, an elevator that'll take you from that master bedroom third floor deck down to the ground floor or down to the second floor, whatever it might be. And check these out. These are for the people who still want to get out there and do their shit. Okay, look at these all-terrain type of wheelchairs. These ones are fantastic. When I discovered these things, my hat's off to the people who still want to get out there. These couple of pictures of ranchers and farmers and stuff are just amazing. They're out there tending a cornfield and everything else. So consider an all-terrain overland type of wheelchair if it fits your lifestyle and fits your needs, especially if you're getting out here in the woods. Check that out as well. So there you go. Some small considerations when it comes to landscaping in and around a family member or a friend, a client or whatever, who's faced with a physical challenge of one kind or another, either mobility or maybe visual. I thank you for sticking with me. Don't forget our giveaway coming up this month. The drawing is going to be in the middle of the month, and I'd love to have you win 2 copies of that ebook I'm putting out, Landscaping Simplified. So check that out. Email is always right there. We also have the 30-day email consultation that's going on. I thank you for your time and attention. Any questions that you might have, drop them in the comments below, or you can email me directly, and I will catch up with you next week, every Friday, and I will catch you guys then. I appreciate your time. You guys take care.